Hello everyone, and welcome to another review. Since I talked about Amphibia in my last review, I thought it would be appropriate to now talk about its sister show, a show that's set in the same universe as Amphibia and is similar in basic concept and story, but has a lot more going on when you pull back the curtain. That being The Owl House. This is by far one of the more interesting shows I've seen. It has a very interesting story, characters, and it's a series that in some ways is very daring. Why is that? Well, without further ado, let's find out. This is my review of Disney's The Owl House. Watch your step. So, Disney's The Owl House was created by a woman named Dana Terrace. Back in 2016, Dana first conceived a story about a girl learning how to be a witch. After being told the concept was boring by a fellow writer, she basically began researching and further developing the concept. After shopping around, she eventually landed on Disney, as according to Dana, Disney was the only company who would let her make a series in a 22-minute format, while other networks like Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network were only looking for 11-minute comedies. Disney would fund the creation of what would become the pilot and test animation of the series. And come the year 2018, Disney gave the green light, and thus the series entered production. Honestly, it's really interesting researching on how this series came to be, as well as that comment that other writer made about how the concept would be boring. Yeah, I think you might want to retract your statement, buddy. So, the story of The Owl House is an interesting one, as on the surface, it is kind of similar to Amphibia, with the girl finding her way into a weird world and trying to get home. But when you really look into it, you'll find that there really is a lot more to it than what's on the surface, as it's really a story about finding your place and people who will accept you for who you are. But aside from that, there's also some very interesting and somewhat darker themes in this, like the whole plot with Bellows, which I'll go into more detail later. So, Season 1, the season where it all begins. Right off the back, I like how it wastes no time into getting into the story. Like, we do get a few episodes here and there which serve as basic world building and slice of life week-to-week adventures, but for the most part, each episode, even the weaker ones, feels like they're building off the previous and build a cohesive narrative. Pretty much each episode feels decently paced. There's never a point where I feel like the writers were just going down a list of things to check off and establish. It all flows really well. There really is only a few episodes that I felt like were skippable, as they nearly all do a good job of keeping the viewer's attention. I'll talk more about this in the good stuff and character sections, but I'll just say, I really like Luz this season. She starts off as this really enthusiastic, overeager, and somewhat immature naive kid, but over time, she slowly matures and learns not to rush into things, if she wants any shot at becoming a good witch. I also like her dynamic with Ida and King, and seeing them go from essentially being a witch's apprentice, and a witch's pet, to being a family that really cares for one another. Aside from the characters, the animation this season is decent. The colors and lighting look so good, especially during the fight scenes. Seriously, you can tell most of the show's budget went into these scenes, as they look so awesome. It's not just the animation, but the music is also really good. It has this enchanting, magical vibe to it. I guess it's the bells they use? I don't know. But it really fits with the show. My favorite piece is the end credits theme. It has such a calming, whimsical vibe to it. Another thing I have to point out is that the world building for this show is very interesting. I think it's a bit better in season 2, but for what we got here, it's decent. Like how we learned that they have their own equivalent to a black market, justice system, currency, etc. Going back to a previous point, I like how they established early on that the Boiling Isles is currently under the control of Emperor Bellows and the Coven system he established, while still not totally revealing to the audience what's really going on here. And I also like how they established stuff like Ida's curse and King's misconception of his past early on in this season as well. I'll get more into it later, but I'll just say I really like how they cleverly managed to tie all these seemingly unrelated plot points together by the series finale. I also have to give a shout out to the side characters. Again, I'll go into more detail later, but I'm just going to say they're all, for the most part, really well written and memorable. I like how they establish each character. From the very first moments they're on screen, you have a pretty good idea on who they are. Willow is the one that lacks confidence, Gus is young and excitable, Amity's stuck up, the list goes on. I also like how each character has their own little arc, like Willow and Amity reconnecting and becoming friends again, Lilith's whole thing with Ida and her curse, etc. It helps give a bit more depth to the characters, making them just that more interesting. And I like how the team continues developing and expanding upon said arcs in the following seasons. So, aside from a few minor flaws, Season 1 is a great introduction to the show. It's decently paced, has good animation and music, it sets up everything it needs to, and it has a decent conclusion. So I give it a 6 out of 10. So, Season 2, the season where things get interesting. Right off the bat, the season picks off pretty much where Season 1 left off. We see how things have changed and how our cast is coping with said changes. With Luz no longer having a way home, Lilith effectively no longer working for the Emperor, and now sharing Ida's curse, the list goes on. I like how they raised the stakes this season via the proper introduction of Hunter, the Golden Guard. I'll talk more about him later, but he's honestly one of my favorite characters in the whole show. His whole arc of him learning the truth about Bellows' plan and him becoming his own person is very interesting to see play out. I also like how they continue the strong character development seen from the last season. We learn more about Ida's backstory and how much this curse has really affected her. Like, it's basically one of the reasons why she shut herself off from everyone else, including her own family, with the other reason being her not wanting to join a coven. And I like how we see her slowly come to terms with the curse, accepting that it's a part of who she is and will be for the rest of her life. I'll also give props to the team on how they handled Luz and Amity's relationship. It didn't feel forced at all, it felt natural, and I like how they play off each other. They are the definition of a power couple. Another thing I liked is the new intro for the season, and how they change it mid-season to coincide with the changes the characters are going through, like how Amity's hair color is green, but from Through the Looking Glass Ruins onwards, it's purple. The same can be said for the end credits, where we see Amity with her green hair hanging out with Luz, Gus, and Willow has a small flower. And then, from the Looking Glass onwards, we see Amity, now with her purple hair, holding hands with Luz, and Willow holding a full-grown flower, symbolizing how much the cast has grown. And then there's the Bellows plot. My goodness, there's a lot to unpack with it, that again, I'll get more into later, but I'll just say, the way the team went about it was so clever, so good, that in a lot of ways was kind of relatable. It's honestly why Bellows, or Philip, is now up there as one of my favorite Disney TVA villains. We learn so much about who he is, what his plan is, and how it's affected the citizens of the Boiling Isles' way of thinking, the ones who actually bought into what he was saying. Like, Objectively looking at things like Ida, you can see how wrong Bellows is, and how his whole claim about how wild magic is bad very clearly has holes in it, going off how Ida, Luz, and the others operate. I really like how they managed to keep his whole plan, and subsequently Bellows himself, a mystery until midway through the season. From the way Ida talks about both him and his system to his initial introduction, you get a bit of an idea that not everything is as it seems, which becomes more and more evident as the series progresses, which leaves the audience guessing on what's really going on here until the season finale. So overall, a vast improvement over the last season, with the stakes higher than before and an amazing season finale with beautiful animation and music. So I give it an 8 out of 10. So, Season 3, if you can even call it that, is the final season of the show. Okay, so, long story short, basically, from what I understand, Disney, for whatever reason, decided to cancel the show, as it didn't fit with Disney's brand, whatever that means. So because of this, several things got changed. I recommend you go look it up, as it's very interesting to say the least. But because of this, Season 3 ended up being condensed into 3 specials. A 3-part movie, if you will. So, was it any good? Yes. Yes, it was. To be perfectly honest, this is possibly the best way the team could have ended the series, given the situation they were in. My god, this thing is amazing. It manages to wrap up nearly everything in the most satisfying way possible. We see Hunter finally standing up to Bellows, Luz reconciling with her mother, and her finally being able to do magic like a witch, albeit for a brief period of time. The list goes on. I also like how it gives the full backstory on both Philip and his brother Caleb, and how it ties Flapjack into it, which makes his sacrifice all the more tragic, but also explains why he was so drawn to Hunter in the first place. Another thing I liked about this season is the character development Camilla gets. We get some taste of it here and there back in seasons 1 and 2, but here, we really get to learn more about who she is, and we see her grow, and learn that she was wrong for trying to change Luz into something she's not, which kind of did push her away, resulting her wanting to stay in the Boiling Isles. I also like how she recognizes how much Luz has changed, and despite everything, accepts it with open arms, and still agrees to help both her and her new friends survive in the human realm and defeat Bellows. Most of my critiques this season, like Hunter and Willow's relationship not getting the time I think it needed to blossom, or not seeing the witches properly interact with the human realm, can mainly be chalked up to the situation the team was in when making this season. So, I'll give it a pass, though I'll also talk about it when we get there. I mean, this is a review, so it's getting the full treatment. One final thing I have to talk about is the music for this season. They really knocked it out of the park with it, especially at the end of the final episode, Watching and Dreaming. It really gives a sense of finality, seeing the aged up versions of these characters we've all come to know, living their best lives, and how the Boiling Isles is healing now Bellows is gone. Also, the time skip scene as a whole in general was cool as well, with it ending on Luz's blatant quinceañera. Kind of drove home how much he's really helped nearly everyone in the Isles, so it's only fitting that they do something for her in return. Also, the animation, what can I say? It's amazing, especially during both the fight scenes and emotional scenes. The way everything is shot and lit looks so good and matches the tone of the scene. There is hardly a point I can think of that really took me out of it. So overall, an amazing way to end this series with good music, good animation, and just overall tied everything that's been built up to this point in a nice, satisfying way. So I give it a 9 out of 10. Like any series, the characters are its greatest asset, and this show is no exception. let's start with Luz. I've gotta say, I thought Luz was a very good character. Her whole story arc was very interesting to watch. How she goes from someone who feels like an outcast that no one understands, to someone with friends who do understand her. I also like how we see her grow and mature throughout the series, and I especially like how we see how her growth has affected nearly everyone around her. Like Gus gaining more self-esteem, Willow becoming more confident, Hunter waking up and realizing the truth about Bellows and becoming free, the list goes on. And then there's Amity. Both Amity and Luz's relationship is both interesting and sweet. As they spend more and more time together and get closer, Amity becomes more and more empowered to do what she wants. She manages to stand up to her mom and dad, she's more willing to bend the rules if it means she can help her friends, and she also manages to repair the broken friendship between both her and Willow, all thanks to Luz. Going back to a previous point, Luz, like the rest of the cast, is a very different person than she was at the start of the series. And that becomes evident in both seasons 2 and 3. She's not the same over-hyper kid that she was in her debut episode. She's a bit more rational and mature in what she's doing, compared to early season 1, where she would jump into a situation without thinking. Like, look at Luz in season 1, and compare her to how she is in both seasons 2 and 3. It's basically night and day. Like, I doubt season 1 Luz would have been able to handle the Collector with the correct amount of maturity as season 3 Luz. Moving on to Willow, she's a very interesting character. I like her arc of how she grows from someone who lets bullies push her around to someone who's able to stand on her own 2 feet. I also like her relationship with Gus. The two play off each other really well. Like, you have Gus, who's this over-hyper excitable kid, and Willow, who's more down to earth. Moving on to her and Amity, I'll just say it was interesting, as the two used to be friends, but thanks to external forces, that friendship was temporarily ended. But thanks to Luz, the two managed to repair the rift, and by the end of the series, became friends again. Though, I do wish we saw more of the two growing closer and mending their friendship, but for what we got, it was good. Now, as far as her and Hunter go, I don't have that much to say, but their dynamic was alright. It's clear that there is something between them. I just wish it was further expanded upon, as all we really got of their relationship was just them, mainly Hunter, blushing. But aside from that, their dynamic is interesting, as the two have similar backgrounds, that being how prior to meeting Luz, nearly everyone around them thought very low of them. And I like how Willow was essentially one of the first proper friends Hunter made, and I like how much she cares about him. Now, regarding her dynamic with Luz, I thought the two made a great pairing. I like how close they are. They have almost a sisterly bond, which is nice. I also like how she was basically the first kid Luz properly met since arriving in the Boiling Isles, and by having her be the first kid in the Boiling Isles Luz met and befriended, it also allowed Luz to be introduced to Amity, and subsequently be exposed and subjected to her bullying behavior, kicking off their whole enemies to lovers arc, which was clever on the writer's part. Now on to Gus. He's an alright character. In some ways, he's kind of similar to Luz, in terms of how Luz is interested in learning as much as she can about magic and the demon realm. In turn, Gus is interested in learning about everything he can about the human realm. I also like his arc of him learning not to put himself down so much, or worry what others think of him. Now, there isn't much to say about him and Hunter, as we hardly see them interact until the final episodes of Season 2, and then Season 3. But for what we got, they make an interesting pairing. I like the best friend dynamic they form when they're in the human realm, and how they bond over that sci-fi book series. Wish we saw more of that. Now on to Amity. She's honestly one of the more interesting of the bunch. I like how much she grows over the course of the series, going from a bully who only cares about herself to someone who's willing to put herself out there to help the one she loves. I like how we get to see why she acted the way she did back in season 1, and it's all due to her parents. I mean, it's clear that her parents, mainly her mother, are, or at least were, in the case of her dad, very neglectful or abusive, seeing as how they were more concerned about their image and putting their own selfish interests first, and their kids' interests last. I mean, the two literally made her stop being friends with Willow because she was, quote, a late bloomer, and made her hang out with the mean kids, all for their own selfish reasons. While it doesn't justify her behavior, it does explain why, as that attitude and environment can negatively impact a kid, which makes her relationship with Luz very interesting, as aside from her siblings, but even then, when you see how much they mess with her in the first season, Luz is basically the first person since Willow who genuinely cares and wants to help her. Again, she helps her mend the relationship between her and Willow, she helps her and her dad reconnect, and she also helps Amity gain the courage to stand up to her mother. And in return, Amity helps Luz open up about her dad and figure out what she wants in life, which helps with the creation of her palisman. Aside from that, she's a fun character, who is a good contrast to Luz's outgoing personality, with her being more down-to-earth, so to speak. Moving on to Ida, she's also a very interesting character. I like the bit of parallels between her and Luz, how she was also once a very eager and determined kid, as well as a bit of a laid-back rebel. But as the show goes on, we see her mature and actually become a caring parental figure for both Luz and King. I also kind of find it funny how Luz jokes about how motherly she is in the season 1 episode Lost in Language, when she's caring for Bat Queen's kids, how Ida basically shrugs off the idea of her being a parent, and then she basically adopts King in season 2, and embraces it, considering how her dad is referred to as King's grandfather, and she refers to King as her sister's nephew. Speaking of her sister, their dynamic is interesting, as they're both kind of similar. Both of them initially wanted to be in the Emperor's Coven, and both are willing to cheat to get their way. But despite that, the two definitely care deeply for one another. I mean, Lilith made Ida give part of her curse to her, so she wouldn't have to suffer alone, in the season 1 final, Young Blood, Old Souls. Speaking of which, I like Ida's whole arc regarding the curse, how she slowly learns to accept that she's stuck with it forever, and it's now part of who she is, and how she kind of embraces it ultimately. I also like the subtle detail of how it's part of the reason why she shut herself off from the rest of the world, with the exception of King and Hootie, with the other reason being her not wanting to join a coven, which in turn helps ties in with the show's message of acceptance. Plus, with her not wanting to join a coven and shutting herself off from the rest of the world because of her curse, it kind of allowed her to wake up and experience the freedom that the other witches and demons couldn't experience since they were locked under the coven system. Next we have King. He's a pretty fun little guy, and I like how at first, partially thanks to Ida, he wants power and control, to be feared. But as time goes on, he learns that lifestyle isn't as cracked up as he thought, and it turns out to be lonely for him, and not as fun, as opposed to being not a tyrant, and actually having friends and connections around you. Which is further exemplified by the Collector, as he kind of has the same immature behavior King had at the start of season 1. I also like his backstory, and how it, again, ties into everything with the mystery of what he is, that being a Titan. Which again, the way the team went about it was very clever and kind of funny. I mean, the answer to what he is was literally staring everyone in the face for the entire show. Now on to Hootie, and I'm sorry, I just don't like Hootie. Now don't get me wrong, he has his moments. His dynamic with Lilith was nice to see, as you have this crazy tube thing and this strict do things by the book's character. Seeing them interact and become close friends was nice, as they play off each other really well, and he does make for a good, well, defense against enemies. But aside from that, I'm sorry, I just found him a tad bit annoying. I get that he's basically the comic relief, but he just didn't click with me. Moving on to the last two main characters. First up, we have Hunter. And my gosh, do I have a bit to say about him. Out of the main cast, he's one of the more interesting characters. He spent his early life falsely believing that Bellows' way was the only true path forward. By doing so, he, along with everyone else who believed in what Bellows was telling them about the Titan that he claimed to be able to communicate with, despite it being, well, dead, falsely believed that wild magic was bad, and if they stuck with Bellows through the Day of Unity, with help from the Titan, they would be brought into a new paradise world, free of wild magic. I like how, in his quest for knowledge and wanting to prove himself to Bellows, it kind of starts his waking up process, as we see him constantly at odds with Bellows. Despite being told that wild magic is bad, he keeps on insisting that it could be useful to help him live. But every time, Bellows shoots it down, reminding him that wild magic killed their family, which is proven to be a lie later on. We also get to see the negative effects that living under this system has had on him, as he never really could live as a kid, and essentially had to grow up from an early age to serve the Titan, or Bellows, as he finds out later on. Because of this, he never really got the chance to properly hang out and socialize with other kids his age, which is kind of sad to see, but at the same time, makes it more satisfying when he finally does get the chance to socialize with kids his age in Season 2. All of this eventually builds up to the Season 2 episode Hollow's Mind, where he and Lewis get trapped in Bellows' mind and he finally learns the truth. He finally learns who Bellows really is, that he has been lying to both him and everyone in the Boiling Isles for years. He also learns that there's no paradise, nor does Bellows have any connection with the Titan. And on top of that, he's not his nephew, but a mere clone, of who we later learn is Bellows' brother, Caleb. The existential crisis he goes through is both really surreal and sad to see, because look at it from his perspective. You grew up your whole life thinking you're doing the right thing. Despite some minor doubts you have, you suppress them, because it's drilled into your head since birth that this belief system is the only true way, only to then find out it's all false, and you've just been helping someone who's a manipulative liar, who doesn't care about you or anyone. You can only imagine the amount of emotions and thoughts rushing through one's mind in a situation like that. Aside from that, Hunter's a fun character. As stated previous, his dynamics with Luz, Gus, Willow, etc. were nice to see. I just wish we got to see their dynamics a bit more fleshed out, especially his dynamics with Willow and Gus. Now on to Bellows. Oh boy, where do I even begin with him? I'll just say, he's become one of my favorite Disney TVA villains. His plan, in a nutshell, is to gain the trust of everyone in the Boiling Isles and effectively commit mass genocide. Which, when you see the time period he dates back to, kind of checks out, as Bellows can serve as an allegory for people who have a toxic, closed-minded, black and white worldview, or people who are so wrapped up in their beliefs that there's nothing that you can say or do that will change their minds, which applies to a lot of people from all walks of life, religious or not. And, like some of these individuals, when confronted with evidence that maybe, just maybe, that the worldview is false, or at least not everything is how they were led to believe, they simply refuse to listen and double down on their beliefs. Which is exactly what Bellows does. He did when his brother met Evelyn, which ultimately led to his brother's death, and then, in the series finale, when Luz frees him from the magic that the Collector bestowed upon him that allowed him to live for so long and become that weird green blob creature by using the magic that the Titan's spirit gave her, he still doubles down, saying that magic is bad and it's corrupted both him and Luz, which shows that no matter what they could say or do, nothing was going to change his mind and realize that maybe, just maybe, magic isn't the problem and the real evil here was him. I like how it shows just how dangerous this mindset is and how it can destroy someone, both metaphorically and literally in the case of Bellows. Apart from that, he's a cool villain, who really does feel like a threat. I mean, the fact he successfully managed to manipulate a whole society to elect him as their ruler and fully believe in the nonsense that he was spewing, unquestionably, is both impressive and terrifying. This guy will stop at nothing to fulfill his delusional idea of being the hero for humanity, which I admit would be funny because if he did go back to the human realm as a human, what Luz told him is true. No one these days believes in witches and magic. The second he starts talking about the demon realm and magic, they think he's crazy. He'd likely end up spending the rest of his life in a mental institution. And then we have the Collector. I don't have that much to say, given how little we see of him, but I'll just say, for what we got, he was interesting. Like, you can't really say he's a villain. I mean, what he did to the Boiling Isles and its citizens was messed up, don't get me wrong. But as we can see, he's really just an immature, misguided kid who really, at the end of the day, was just someone who's lonely and wants friends. A bit similar to Luz at the start of the series, as hardly anyone wanted to associate with him. His peers didn't want to deal with him, so he went down to interact with the Titans' kids, which, going off of that book, seems like something he's not supposed to do, which led to all his new friends being eliminated and him being locked away. Which is kind of sad when you break it down, but I also like how he grows, and again, serves as kind of a parallel to how King was at the start of the series. Really shows how much King has changed, and his arc in realizing that treating people like this and what mortality is was cool and kind of sad to see, as again, at the end of the day, he's really just a young kid with a very limited understanding of how the world actually works. Now, as far as the side characters go, they're all really good, well-written characters, who I wish we could have gotten more focus and development on. Let's start with Rain. They're a pretty good character. I like their dynamic with Ida, and it was cute seeing them reconnect, as well as getting a flashback episode showing how they initially met. I also like the subplot of them rebelling against Bellows. It was interesting, as similar to Hunter, they've also spent their whole life believing that Bellows' system was the only true way. It's only after they got in, as a Coven head, is when they realized that something was very wrong with how things are run under Bellows' system. Lilith was also very interesting. Similar to Hunter and Rain, she also believed in Bellows' lies, at first, as Bellows told her that he could fix Ida's curse, under the condition that she capture the then, quote, wild witch and make her join the Emperor's Coven. It's only when she actually does capture Ida that everything comes crashing down around her, and she finally realizes that, oh crap, this guy doesn't have her best interest at heart. As stated previous, I found her dynamic with Hootie interesting, as again, Lilith is a very calculated, do things by the books kind of character, and Hootie is, well, the exact opposite of that. They have a nice friendship, and seeing them bond was sweet. Next, we have Camilla. I find her as a bit of a fascinating case, as once upon a time, she was just like Luz, very into nerdy niche stuff. But sadly, she ended up suppressing that and conforming, thinking inside the box, so to speak, as opposed to being unique and her own person. I like her little arc of her at first trying to make Luz like everyone else, and then coming to understand that doing that was wrong, and likely is what influenced Luz's decision to stay in the Boiling Isles. I like how she recognizes this and tries her best to support her, and ultimately help her and everyone defeat Bellows, which in turn makes the two much more closer than they've ever been before. As far as the rest of the cast go, they range from decent to really good. Principal Bump was a good authority figure at the school, stern but fair. Basha was an interesting bully character. Given Amity's backstory, it doesn't take that much to assume why she also acted the way she did, wish we got to see more of her. And Kikimora was an interesting recurring villain, as she did everything in her power to prove herself to Bellows, but it ultimately was never enough or really mattered in the end, as she ended up putting her own life in danger. Which, I mean, is accurate, as that's what ends up happening to lots of people who subscribe to high control groups. They do everything in their power to prove themselves, even going as far as neglecting familial needs. Like how Kikimora had the opportunity to go back and see her family, but instead chose to help Bellows when presented the opportunity for a promotion, only for it to be revealed to her at the last minute that said promotion was allowing her to live. And like some people, despite that, she still did everything in her power to prove herself to Bellows, only to find out at the last minute that he never cared for her or anyone in the Boiling Isles, and just threw her away as if she never mattered to begin with. Moving on to the other Coven heads, there isn't that much to say about them individually, aside from Darius and his dynamic with Hunter, as out of everyone in the castle, he seems to be the only real person, aside from Eberwolf, who actually cared about him. I mean, he did try to push him to hang out with kids his own age and make some friends on his one day off in the season 2 episode, Any Sport in a Storm. And I also like how he ultimately also saw through Bellows' ruse. How and when did that happen though, is something that I wish they did a better job at explaining. As far as the other heads go, we don't learn that much about them, aside from Tara and Adrian, who I've got to say are interesting, as they were probably the most loyal to Bellows. They stuck with him to the very end, and despite being shown by nearly dying that everything Bellows told them was a lie, and after Bellows' defeat, they still refused to let his system die out, and briefly tried to rebuild it and keep it going. Which, let's be honest, there are people who, despite being shown that the ideology or belief system is harmful to themselves and everyone around them, are so indoctrinated that even after it's all been disbanded, they still have faith in it and try to keep it alive. Other than that, there isn't much to say about them individually, though I will say I did like Adrian's posh director persona, which, I mean, he is the head of the Illusions Coven, so I guess it would make sense that he wants everything to be perfect and believable. Moving on to V, there isn't much I have to say about her. I think her backstory is interesting, and her dynamic, from what little we see of it, with Luz and Camilla is sweet. But that's really it. There isn't much we know about her, aside from her being a shape-shifting basilisk, and seemingly having a thing for Masha. But that's it. A similar thing can be said about Emrai and Edric. Well, mainly Emrai. I'm sorry, but while there is some interesting traits about her, like how she likes to mess with Amity sometimes, her close relationship with her brother, and how both her and Edric really do care and want to help Amity, that's really it. Like, there isn't much we know about her specifically outside of her dynamics with her siblings. Compare that to Edric, where he actually does have a bit more going on with him. In the season 2 episode, Reaching Out, we learned that he tends to self-doubt himself and feels like a screw-up, and it made for an interesting story. And while it wasn't much, it did make him slightly more interesting compared to Emrai. Like, if they gave her either her own standalone episode or full subplot like Edric, I wouldn't have much to complain. But as it is, there's again not much to say about her. As a pair, the two work well together, and it was nice seeing them turn around and help Amity and the others. So overall, the characters in the show are really good. While there's some that didn't click with me, there really isn't a character that made me go, this is the worst character put to screen, or whatever. They're all fun, and seeing them mature and grow throughout the show was very satisfying to watch. So, what are the good things about this show? Well, quite a lot. For one thing, the pacing is really good. There's never a point where it felt like it was dragging or things were moving way too fast. Everything flowed in a nice, natural way. The animation is also really good. Like the colors and the movements in some shots look amazing and really fluid. As for the music, again, the score for this show is really well composed. My two favorite bits of music for the show is again the end credits theme, as to reiterate again, it has a very magical, calming, whimsical feel to it, yet also has a bit of a mysterious vibe to it as well. My second favorite theme is the one played when we're properly introduced to the Collector. It has such a bouncy, upbeat theme, which fits for the Collector's playful, juvenile persona, while also giving a sense of danger considering what he'll end up doing later on. As stated before, the characters and the arcs they go through are superb. You can really see how much they change and grow from season to season. Which also brings me to my next point, and that is the continuity is really good. I liked how the team managed to tie everything from both the characters and locations to form a cohesive narrative. Nearly every little detail in the show, significant or not, is all tied together. Like how Flapjack was originally Evelyn's palisman, hence why he was so drawn to Hunter, given Hunter is a clone of Caleb. It makes everything feel connected and gives the viewer more of an incentive to watch every episode. Like, there's very few episodes I can say that are skippable, as you'll likely miss something important, be it character development or lore. Another highlight was the Bellows plot, as aside from Bellows being an allegory for people who have this toxic black and white worldview, the plot can also highlight the dangers of people who have this hive mind mindset, like a cult or high control group. I mean, Bellows just waltzes right into the boiling aisles, and through lies and manipulation, convinces everyone that he can communicate with the deceased Titan. And if they all follow the orders that he claims to be receiving from the Titan spirit, they'll all be led into a paradise world. Which is both impressive and terrifying, given how easy and relatively quick he was able to accomplish full control of the Isles, and how everyone just rallied behind his promises. And it only intensified as the Day of Unity drew closer and closer. And by just blindly following him, it almost got them all killed. Other details I liked about this show was the world building. I liked how we slowly learn more and more about how this witchy demon realm world works, from its history to how things currently work. I liked how they effectively have their own version of smart devices, social media, currency, as well as their own justice and school system. You know, aside from the magical elements and exotic wildlife, the society on the Boiling Isles isn't too different to how the average society in the human realm functions. And finally, I like the subtle references to Amphibia we see scattered throughout the show, which makes sense given that the Owl House is Amphibia's sister show. It helps makes the two shows' worlds feel a bit more bigger and expansive. Now, as much as I've praised this show, there are a few flaws I have with it. For one, I wish they had introduced Hunter or had alluded to him a bit earlier in season 1. I get it, they wanted to make Lilith the main antagonist our main cast had to deal with for the season, but considering how important Hunter's role is later on in the series, I feel like they could have done something, like maybe Bellows threatens to punish Lilith, having it where if she doesn't bring him Ida, he would give her work to the Golden Guard, which no doubt would upset her, given how she describes him in season 2. Second, as cool as the montage seen at the beginning of the season 3 episode Thanks to Them was, I felt that it was a bit too much. I understand why they did it, but I don't know. It also kind of interrupts the flow of the episode. Like, we start with this emotional reunion, then we cut to this montage showing everything that's happened since Liz and her friends arrived in the human realm, and then we cut back to the story several months later. A lot of somewhat important things happen, and it just feels like we just glossed over all of that. It really does feel like the team was just checking things off on a list that had to be established before the story could begin. Like, maybe what they should have done was simply, after Luz and Camilla talk, they fade to a few months later, which gives the story a bit more runtime, and they show off everything that's happened subtly, via the visuals, like how the characters are dressed, and maybe with pictures in the background, and through straight lines of dialogue, so everything feels natural and doesn't interrupt the flow of the story. Similar to the scene in the museum with Amity, Gus, V, and Willow in the actual episode. Another issue I had was Rain, after they're captured by Darius in Ida's Requiem. The next time we see them, they can't remember their interaction with her, and are fully subservient to Bellows. However, they tend to get these headaches when they do try to remember. Said headaches are alleviated by a potion created by Terra, which not only alleviates the headaches, but it also erases their memories. But then we find out towards the end of the season that they still remember Ida. So like, did Darius revive their memories? Or did the potion that Terra gave them not work and they were just faking it? I guess not, given that Darius says that Rain is a bad actor. I don't know. It just felt like that whole part with Rain wasn't made very clear. Another issue I had, and this is more of a nitpick, was Hunter and Willow's relationship, as it kind of felt like it came out of nowhere. I like the concept, and I think the two make a good pairing, but I felt it needed more time to develop. Luz and Amity had 2 whole seasons, as well as Ida and Rain, to develop their relationships, but for Hunter and Willow, there wasn't much. Like, I can see how it could have started, given that Willow was one of the first real friends Hunter has ever made. But other than that, we don't get much, aside from a few blushes here and there. Maybe if they had a few more subtle interactions, say Willow has to save Hunter or something back in season 2, and this leaves more of an impact on him. Just something. But as it is, it's fine. I just wish it was more fleshed out. My final critique is King's connection to the Collector. I like how they foreshadowed the two meeting and King being the one to eventually free him, but I have to ask, why is he now having these dreams or visions of the Collector? Why now before the Day of Unity? Wouldn't it make more sense if he's been having these types of dreams for a while prior to the Day of Unity? Like, maybe they could have had it where, over the course of the series, King has been having these weird reoccurring dreams, as he interprets them, of him in what we now know as the In-Between, where he sees a silhouette of what we now know as the Collector. He's for the longest time always wanted to know who this person was, but never was able to, due to waking up from said dreams and being too scared to go and investigate himself. The dreams become more frequent as the Day of Unity draws closer. Then, come the Season 2 final, King's Tide, when Amity and the gang are going to rescue Luz, when King is knocked out, he gets a better vision of what the silhouette is, but before he can properly interact with it, he regains consciousness. Then, when Kikimora takes him to the Collector, and he hears the voice and sees the silhouette, everything clicks with him. What we got in the final show was fine, but having it pre-established would have given the whole thing a bit more suspense and mystery. At least on King's end, as by this point, the audience already has some idea who the Collector is, but there's still the lingering question on what his whole connection to King is. So overall, those are my main issues. I do have other nitpicks here and there, but ultimately, these are the ones I felt that were worth highlighting. I'm pleased with what we got in the actual show, but still. So overall, what do I think of the Owl House? Honestly, going into this, I didn't know what to expect. Aside from knowing about Luz and Amity's relationship, it being about magic, its connection to Amphibia, and Disney canceling the series, I basically went into this completely blind. And while not perfect, I was blown away with what I saw. I can really see why so many people like this show. And honestly, if it wasn't obvious from my review so far, I also really like this show as well. I really like the overall message about acceptance and finding that group of people who will accept you for who you are and your interests, which is something that I'm sure everyone needs in life. Gosh, I wish I was there when this series initially started, because my gosh, this show was very enjoyable. And now, just like everyone else, I'm also a bit upset that Disney cancelled the series, especially given the little information currently available on how seasons 2 and 3 were originally supposed to play out. Let's just be thankful that despite the cancellation, Disney has decided to not completely drop the characters, given how frequently they appear in those broken karaoke songs and those weird chibi shorts. So, with all that being said, I give The Owl House a 9 out of 10. This has been Sodor Pro, and thank you very much for watching.